So we have another wonderful guest with us here at ChangeNOW in Paris. He's Mikael Nordlander, and he's head of partnerships at Vattenfall.
That's correct.
Very well known, large energy company in Europe. Tell us what you're doing here. What's your purpose of being at ChangeNOW?
Well, it's very exciting to be here. It's a lot of players that we not necessarily meet every day.
Yeah.
The reason for going here is, it's 10 years since the Paris Agreement was signed, and we were contacted because of the organizers wanted us to come and talk about one of the achievements we've done in the last 10 years in the aura of the Paris Agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been on stage today in 2 panels talking about our fossil-free steel projects that we have been developing together with LKAB and SSAB in Vattenfall in Sweden.
All right. So these are the so-called hard-to-abate industries that people talk about. It's lovely to be here remembering the Paris Agreement. I was actually the official spokesperson for the Paris Agreement. And of course, in Paris in 2015, we felt as the United Nations, and I think everybody in the room, that we've solved all the world's problems. We thought it was all done. And then of course, gravity sets in, because then the hard work begins. So you are basically bringing hydrogen, from what I understand, as a solution to the steel industry in Sweden, and
Yes.
perhaps further afield, if it develops further afield. But and so how is that going? How long has it taken, this partnership? And what have you achieved so far?
Well, we started it in 2016, and the Paris Agreement was one of the most important reasons for us to start then. So even though reality set in, the Paris Agreement was really important for us to get going. To quote one of the members of the project, he said that the companies that don't get a signal right now, don't get a message, no one will feel sorry for them. So this really pushed the companies in the right direction to think about long-term decarbonization and getting rid of fossil fuels, also in the hard-to-abate sectors. We started by conducting an 18-month pre-study, finding out that it actually seems to make sense to go for deep decarbonization, get rid of the fossil fuels entirely, rebuild the process, rebuild the entire value chain to get fossil-free steel from mine all the way to finalized steel product. So in 2018, we decided to test that in sort of least industrial scale, a pilot scale as we call it, think 1 ton per hour or so. And that is what we have been done since. We have invested about 200 million euros over the course of a 6-year period now to build each and every step of the value chain. And actually yesterday we finalized the last part of this pilot program and concluded the results, which I have to say is amazingly successful from a technical perspective.
I don't want to dive too deep into the technical side, but what special challenge does hydrogen represent versus what they were using before? I presume they were using coking fossil fuels, yeah?
Yes, you have been using coke in blast furnaces, coke acting as a glue that rips out what you don't want from the iron ore to make iron, and what you don't want is oxygen. So
right.
Coke and oxygen forms carbon dioxide, so it's an inherent part of the process. So as long as the carbon is there, you cannot really solve it. And our, as simple as genius idea that came up was to exchange the glue, the coke, to hydrogen. And what you need to do then is to make hydrogen in a clean way, of course. And we do that by electrolysis of water, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. We do that by using fossil-free electricity. And of course that means that a lot of fossil fuels that are going out of the process will need to be replaced by almost as much, not as much actually because it's more efficient, electricity instead to make this hydrogen. And that's of course a challenge, because then you suddenly get a very, very big new consumer into a power system, into a power market. And that has been the role of us and Vattenfall in this cooperation to see to it how this will impact the power system. Is it possible to expand the production? Does it work in the system? We know that the cheapest way today to meet an increased demand short term is to build more wind and solar. We learned to open the tap to those efficiently now. So, and that means that you will have a weather dependency on the supply side for a process that would like to run 24/7. So looking at this from a holistic perspective and also taking into account the balancing challenge of storing hydrogen, that has been a quite critical element to explore in this partnership. But that is what we also managed to do successfully in the pilot phase.
So you've got now a kind of systems approach to this.
Yes.
Yeah. What does it take to allow them to, for their whole production, these two steel companies, do you have to build more wind farms? Do you have to, what is needed now to go that next step to full commercialization of this process?
I mean, the good thing about being in northern Sweden now is that the power is sort of, at least for the first steps when scaling up to commercial, the power is already there. We have a huge surplus of fossil-free electricity now in northern Sweden, which means that we can, at the start now when scaling up, focus on the process of making iron and steel instead. And that is happening right now as we speak. SSAB has already taken investment decision on an electric arc furnace to melt iron and make steel, so the more downstream part. LKAB is on course of taking the investment decision next year, hopefully, on the first plant using hydrogen to make iron. And making hydrogen in large scale, we know that we can do that. Norwegians did that already in the 1920s, but there is no big manufacturing capacity established for that today. So building a first-of-a-kind plant this size means that you will need to drag along the entire supply chain as well. So we need more factories. We need consultancy firms who can make that kind of projects. Right. So it's an ecosystem formation around this now, and that's also why it's important that we're not alone in this. I mean, we would like to see many more projects. Yeah. Go in the same direction because it builds ecosystems.
Yes, yes. I mean, Vattenfall is more than Sweden. It is, I live in Germany and I'm a customer of Vattenfall for my electricity supply, and it seems to be going greener and greener, which is great. I mean, could some of the other European countries benefit from what you've learned and the achievements that you've made? Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, decarbonization needs to happen all over Europe. We have blast furnaces also in other places. When changing this value chain from the old fossil blast furnace based one into a new electricity and hydrogen based one, what might need to happen is sort of a partial reallocation of this value chain. So if you are in a place where you totally lack access to fossil-free electricity, it might not be the best idea to start to set up the hydrogen production there. But you could, for example, make hydrogen-based iron as an intermediate product that could still be used into steel plants in continental Europe. So it can actually make the situation a bit better, at least mid-long term, for European steel industry, that they can lean on the parts, use the strength of Europe, where you have parts of Europe which has better access to fossil-free electricity.
I mean, I suppose there are other ways of making methane, but they're not as green, right? Sorry, making hydrogen, but they're not as green with methane or something like that. I mean, it's clear that you have chosen the most, climate-friendly method to assist the steel industry, and that's to be applauded, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at decarbonization and phasing out fossil fuels in general, to replace that with fossil-free energy, a dominant majority of the investments into fossil-free energy is today going into electricity production. Yeah. It's in wind and solar, even some more hydro, and in some cases nuclear, where it's beneficial to the system. So it seems like whatever we would need to do in a cost-efficient way to harvest renewable energy, it happens to come in the forms of electrons. Yeah. And that is really the basis why we would like to see that as a major tool to phase out fossil fuels. In some cases, it can work directly. I mean, in heat and in transportation, you can use electricity for a heat pump or for propulsion in a car. But in some cases, you cannot simply use electricity, and especially in the role of that the molecules have, the glue I mentioned in the process. There, it makes a lot of sense to transform some of this fossil-free electricity into hydrogen instead.
Yeah. No, I think that was an interesting point you made, because one can superficially look at a process, an industrial process, and say, well, why don't you just do that, right? But then they're all different, right? And they've got their different dynamics in the way that they actually produce an end product, right? And yeah. What should we look for on the horizon then? I mean, you've done the pilot, you've got good results. We chatted a little bit earlier that perhaps it is currently a little bit more expensive than say the old way of doing it. Although if you're worried about climate change, that's going to get very expensive if we don't control it.
Yep.
So it's all cost benefit analysis, but sometimes the costs are passed down, including over generations. But if one could scale this up, then I think you're indicating that we could get to a point where it is equally competitive with, say, the fossil fuel version of making steel. So at some moment, then a decision has to be taken by the steel industry in Sweden. Do they want to scale up? Is that it? And you as Vattenfall are ready to support that? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you can see the signs in the sky that there are several forces working in this direction. I mean, going back to the Paris Agreement, what that did was to set the direction that whoever pollutes, it's going to be expensive in the future. So that's one force. Another force is that as we develop more steel industry using this new technology, we will have learning curve effects, and likely the cost of at least some parts of the equipment in that process will go down.
Yeah.
Also, one thing that surprised us quite a lot when we started to get small volumes of steel out from our pilot plant was that we saw a huge response from the market side, that there is really proof out there that there is a willingness to pay a premium for this green product, even before. So all these forces together, everything points in the same direction. It's just a question of how fast it will go and when it's going to be more profitable where.
You made just a very good analogy to me when we were chatting before, which is that it could be a matter of just a few €100 on the cost of a car, whereas, rightly or wrongly, you paid.
I paid about the same amount to get 2 USB sockets in the back seat. So
there we go, right.
Yeah. And I mean, this shows the power of the value chain here. I mean, it sounds dramatic that you will face maybe 50 or even 100% more of the cost on the steel.
Yeah.
And the steel industry hates me for this when I say the steel is actually quite a cheap material.
Yeah.
If you turn a ton of steel into a car, the extra price, the extra cost on the price tag of the car is exactly that. It's diluted to a few $100s.
Yeah.
And that eventually comes to the conclusion that handling these hard-to-abate sectors, being out there early, learn how to do that. Yes, it might cause a minor extra cost in the end at the end consumers, but that is way, way below what we will need to face if we are to take the economic burden of a realized climate change instead.
Exactly. I was talking to somebody today about all the wealth of economic assessments about what climate change will actually cost to the global economy. Of course, people say global economy, and they sort of then go to sleep because they think, well, it's not going to be my economy, but in fact, it's going to be everybody's economy. And so, indeed, we need to make these steps. And then, as you say, you get economies of scale with the new things. I'm old enough to remember when color television sets came in and nobody could afford them, but now they're just like cheap as chips. So, I mean, right.
And all transitions are typically S-curve shaped.
Yeah.
So, and right now we are looking for that bend when it's starting to look like an S.
Yeah.
But it's never linear. And I think a few years back we might thought it would be more linear, so we're sort of in a disappointment mood right now. But I couldn't be more convinced that we will get there because the alternative is not really pleasant.
Well, great work. These hard-to-abate sectors, it's so interesting to talk about them and see that these things are happening. And I think it's worth also discussing it, certainly when we don't have time because we reach a lot of people, to know that the world is still moving on climate change, and it will continue to move on climate change because a lot of people have invested a lot in this for all the right reasons, and that's the way we have to go. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.